Debuffs can be one of the most powerful parts of a commander in Rise of Kingdoms, and today I will be telling you the most valuable debuffs in the game. Not only will I state which debuffs are currently the best, but I will give you how to figure out which debuffs will be the best in the future, because there is a lot of criteria with debuffs on which skills they're in, how much stats they're removing, how they work. I will be discussing all of that today. So if you're interested in investing in commanders to have really good debuffs so they can have very longevity for the future, you definitely need to watch this video. Let's start off with the two forms that debuffs can take. You can have an active skill debuff, such as LIANG or Boudica Primes. For example, Boudica Prime's active skill debuff makes the target take increased skill damage and reduces their march speed. The thing with active skill debuffs is you must remember they cannot stack. So for example, Boudica has a debuff which reduces the opponent's march speed. Now, if I were to use a Saladin in my murder ball, whose active skill also reduces my opponent's march speed, then that debuff won't stack. Whichever debuff has the most time left, or whichever debuff has a higher potency, will cancel out the other debuff. To my knowledge, if you have a debuff such as Boudica Primes, let's say it was a 35% reduction instead of 30, and then Saladin's 5-second debuff kicked in after, what would happen is once Boudica's debuff runs out, Saladin's debuff should happen for the next however many turns left. I think that's how that works. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So if you do have a double up debuff on any commanders, I'm pretty sure that if one debuff wears out and the other one is still technically supposed to be active, it will still work. However, if there is a debuff that is just way more potency, so for example, if Boudica threw her 30% march speed reduction and Saladin had 2 seconds left on a 25% march speed reduction, those 2 seconds would be completely lost and overridden by Boudica's 30% reduction. So it is important to note that. The other type of debuff is a passive slot debuff, and one great example of this is Cyrus. On his third skill, he has a skill damage reduction, so skill damage dealt reduction, in a passive slot. This means that if any other commander has a skill damage reduction debuff, whether it be in a passive or an active skill slot, it will stack. So you don't need to worry about having double ups of passive skill slots, since they will stack. Another one of these is Ethelfled, who has, I'm pretty sure, a slow on her second skill. This will stack with Saladin slow or Boudica slow, because it is once again in a passive skill slot. That is something you should definitely remember. So passive skill slot debuffs are always going to be more valuable, since they can stack unlimited. It doesn't matter how many passive skill slot debuffs you have. If they trigger, they're going to stack. It does not matter. So that is something to keep in mind. Passive skill slots are also a really good debuff to have on a commander, not just active skill debuffs. Now, the next thing you're looking out for when you're looking for a debuff is what type of debuff are they? Not just active skills, like what are they doing? Are they making your troops deal more damage, or are they making your troops more tanky or making the enemy deal less damage? So an example of a debuff which I like to call an offensive debuff, this is a debuff which allows your troops to deal more damage to your opponents, is Boudica Prime's debuff, a 35% skill damage taken increase for the opponent. This means that all skill damage you're dealing to the opponent will be 35% more heavy. These debuffs are extremely good for when you want to kill opponents quicker. Maybe you find that your murder ball is lacking a bit on the damage, but it's very tanky. You may consider going for a commander which has an offensive debuff. Other offensive debuffs can include debuffs such as a health debuff. Not really though, because sometimes health and defense don't really make you deal as much damage, rather they make you take less damage. For example, attack doesn't really make you deal more damage, only makes you take less damage. I'm pretty sure health and defense will allow you to deal more damage though. Then you have the defensive debuffs, and these are debuffs which make the opponent deal less damage usually. For example, this 40% skill damage dealt reduction on Cyrus means that if you were to put that on a YSG, just as an example, his AoE would deal the AoE damage normally, except it would be reduced by 40% if it had the Cyrus debuff. It's much better than having just a buff. For example, Henry, who has a skill damage taken reduction, this debuff will apply to everything that commander hits. So that's something that's also really good about debuffs. Now, there is also one other type of debuff, and these are supportive debuffs. Usually they come in the form of a march speed reduction or like a heal block such as Ramsey's. Those are your supporting debuffs. They can help the opponent stack quicker. For example, the heal block will make it so they don't heal, and the march speed will allow you to catch up to opponents. So those are definitely your more supportive debuffs. They are supporting your march, but they're kind of just a category of their own. They're not really particularly that useful. The march speed is pretty good, but for the most part, you're not really looking too much for supportive debuffs. Now, what else can make a debuff more valuable? And one thing is definitely the time of that debuff. Most debuffs nowadays last for 3 seconds, but some commanders, especially from a long time ago, could only have a 2-second debuff, for example, Ethelflaed's debuff. And then some really old commanders can have debuffs that last up to 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure Hannibal Barca has a 5-second debuff. He does. So really old commanders have 5-second debuffs, which are extremely good because you can cycle their skill and then get that skill to throw again basically before the debuff runs out. Obviously, Hannibal Barca still is not a good commander because his debuffs are pretty low in terms of effectiveness, though he does have a 5-second debuff. And if a commander has a higher time debuff, it can actually be really good. Even 2 seconds of an extra debuff is amazing. Then also the way they apply those debuffs can be important. For example, often a passive skill slot is a chance, so you only have a 10% chance. There is no guarantee that that is going to throw off when you want it or when you need it. But active skill debuffs such as LIANG's AoE debuff are really good. And also, a debuff that can apply to multiple targets such as LIANG's AoE, Ethelflaed's AoE are also amazing and something you should definitely keep an eye out for. Often an AoE debuff is a lot more valuable than just a single target debuff. Because, for example, when Gilgamesh came out, his single target debuff was mental. Then they put CPO out with the same debuff and with an AoE, so CPO Prime pretty much just destroyed that debuff. Now, what debuffs are currently the best in the game? And we'll start off with our rank 1 position, pretty much. The best of the best debuffs. And these go to pretty much 2 commanders, which I think are pretty equal. You've got Tamiris' debuff, which makes the opponent take a crazy extra amount of skill damage, which also buffs her active skill damage. And she's also got a passive slot debuff, so she's also got extra debuffs on top of that. But her main debuff is her 4th skill passive slot. That is her best debuff. And then tying with Tamiris, you've got Sargon with his Auto Effect, pretty much doing the same thing to the opponent. However, it is on a different commander. Next, we have CPO Prime's debuff, and since it's an AoE, it takes a high spot on this list. 30% health reduction to 3 targets is amazing. It is super high value. That is a debuff that's going to last a while. I don't think that there's going to be another AoE health commander for quite some time. And even though it is on an active skill, it's going to bring you a ton of value in the open field. And especially if you find your opponents aren't taking as much damage as you would like, a CPO is going to help you deal a lot more damage since that 30% health reduction is amazing. Then we have Guan Yu's debuff, and while it's supportive, it is a silence to 3 targets. It is an amazing debuff. It's one of the best debuffs in the game. It is an example of a really good supportive debuff because it's not making the opponents deal more damage. It is in some ways making them more tanky, but it's really just making it so your opponents can't use their active skills properly. And that is an amazing debuff to have, especially if you want to run something as a Guan Yu and a CPO. Yes, it's a little bit lackluster on damage nowadays and a little bit on tankiness, but it's going to giving so many debuffs, so it's just such a good march to be running. Then we also have LIANG's debuff coming in as well. He deals a 5-target debuff. It's actually the debuff I think is the most targets. I don't think there's any other commanders in the game who deal 5-target debuffs. So LIANG definitely has an amazing debuff there. It's a debuff that makes the opponents deal less damage to you. So it is not as valuable as a debuff that's making the opponents take more damage. However, it is still really good, making you a lot more tanky, and that is enough to pretty much put a whole enemy's murder ball at 15% less ore damage. It is an amazing debuff to have. Then we have Cyrus, and I'm putting Cyrus also on this list above commanders such as Boudica Prime, just because he has 2 amazing debuffs. First of all, he has a debuff which makes the opponents take an additional damage, take an increase of 20%. So all additional damage factor, whether it come from talents, whether it come from active skills, is going to be flat increased by 20% on whoever you're hitting. So that is an example of a debuff which is making your opponent take more damage. And then Cyrus also has another debuff on his 3rd skill, which gives him a skill damage reduction of 40%. So the opponents will deal 40% reduced skill damage to you, which is once again an amazing debuff to have, especially on a commander who is so versatile. He's one of the most versatile archers in my opinion, and his debuff is extremely potent. Then we have Boudica Prime, arguably could be better than Cyrus. Some say she's worse, some say she's better. I personally think her debuff is pretty much on par. She has a extremely high instant skill damage taken increase. The best part about this is it's an active skill one, so it's going to stack with Tamiris and it's going to stack with Sargon. Obviously, it also means that once you throw your active skill, instantly your secondary commander's active skill will deal some more damage to your opponents, and that is something that's extremely good. She also has a nice march speed reduction debuff, which is a nice touch for whenever you need to catch up with people, especially since archers can be quite slow. It does help them catch up and destroy opponents, so this is a good use of a supportive debuff. Now, for our last 3, I'm going to put Alexander Nevsky on the list. Yes, his debuff isn't very amazing, it's only a defense debuff, but it's a 45% defense debuff. It's a really high number, and it's extremely potent, so with a commander such as Alexander Nevsky, his debuff is definitely one of the best defense debuffs out there, and I think it's going to remain that way for quite a while because it is so potent. Then we have Gupta. I also feel like he is important to mention. His debuff is great. It's a health reduction debuff, and I'm pretty sure it stacks up to like 3 times, and it can go even further when you expertise him. I'm pretty sure you can get up to like a 30 to 40% health and defense reduction on just his 3rd skill alone, and it's amazing. If I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong with the numbers there, but it is a really, really good debuff to have, and it's in the passive skill slot, so it's going to stack with any other debuff. It is an extremely great debuff. It stacks with Tamira, Sargon, Guan, all those commanders, even CPO who has a health debuff, it will stack. So that's why it's such a great debuff, and I think it's definitely probably higher on this list than I put it, but I think it would rank around the top 5 debuffs. And then finally, another debuff I feel very important to mention is Ethelfled. She's completely free, and her debuff is in an AoE. She's got a defense, attack, and health reduction of 30%, and then she's also got an amazing passive march speed reduction, dealing more march speed reductions to cavalry of up to 50%, and then also doing a counterattack damage taken reduction, so she takes a 20% less counterattack damage. I know that's kind of a buff, but she also has another chance to inflict march speed reductions on any other units of 30%. So it's a really, really good passive march speed reduction that will stack with commanders such as Honda. It will stack with commanders like Saladin and Boudica. And then obviously her 5-target debuff with 3 different 30% debuffs is amazing. She's definitely a prime example of a commander that's going to be amazing in game modes where you can't bring as many commanders, such as Ark of Osiris and Champions of Olympia. Now, overall, when you're looking for debuffs, you really want to make sure that A, they probably have an AoE such as Ethelfled, or they have an AoE such as LIANG. That is something that's going to give you value. B, if they have it in a passive slot such as Cyrus, such as commanders like Gupta, all those passive slot debuffs are amazing value as well, because they will never ever lose their effectiveness. They will always stack. And then C, do they have anything really special about their debuff? Is it just a generic health debuff? Then maybe it's going to get outclassed. For example, we had Gilgamesh's health debuff. Yes, it was really, really good when it came out, but we know it's probably going to get outclassed because it's in an active skill slot, and also it's just only health. So they're going to definitely add a commander in the future which has a health debuff. Ramsey's defense debuff outclassed by Nevsky. So always make sure you're looking at the uniqueness of that debuff. You don't really see many commanders who deal the same debuff when it's not attack, defense, or health. For example, I think that there are only a few commanders in the game which do all damage dealt reductions, and I'm pretty sure all the other commanders are in passive slots. So Zulang's debuff is probably going to hold value for quite a while. Boudica's debuff, I'm pretty sure, is the only skill damage taken increase on an active skill. So once again, that's going to last quite a while. But is there other commanders out there who already have those debuffs? How long ago did this commander come out? If that debuff is in an active skill slot, stuff like that, you must consider, especially when you're looking at debuffs specifically. Now you know which debuffs are the most valuable, which debuffs in the game are currently the best as of July 2023. And I also have a question for you guys. Let me know in the comments below which debuffs are your favorite that I mentioned, because I am curious to know which commanders you really like just for some upcoming videos and stuff like that. So please let me know which debuffs are your favorite, which commanders are your favorite, and if you found this video even informative. Now, I just want to say I thank you for watching and I hope to see you in the next one.